Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Korea Society. I am Stephen Orper, Senior Vice President, and I'm delighted to welcome you here for a very special evening. Before I begin, I'd like to just point out that we have the 2015 May to August calendar. We would be delighted if you would pick this up on your way out, though it may be what brought you here tonight. And of course, you can always find information on our programs and on membership at koreasociety.org. I'd also like to acknowledge the staff, in particular Nikita Desai and Peter Stemke, who have made such a fundamental contribution to tonight's success. And to Darcy from Council on Foreign Relations, thank you for being here. We're delighted to have so many of you here who are friends of Japan and or Korea. And it is a very special treat to have Brad Glosserman and Scott Snyder, two of our foremost experts on Japan and Korea, respectively. Brad is the Executive Director of Pacific Forum CSIS, based out of Honolulu. Pacific Forum does a tremendous amount in terms of leadership and Track 2 dialogue and analysis, and has just this week released something called Comparative Connections, which is its thrice annual analysis of relationships across the Asia-Pacific. And if you Google Comparative Connections, you'll see the latest edition, which is most wonderful. I see one or two of my NYU students here, and that's something that we've used in the past in our classes. And Brad has been a real thought leader. He was very closely affiliated with the Japan Times for a long time. And just incidentally, the Times recommendation of this book is up online and linked through the webpage. So Brad, thanks for coming all the way from Honolulu to be with us tonight. And Scott Snyder, who is a friend to many in this room. Scott is with the Council on Foreign Relations, and he holds the US-Korea Program Director title there, and really is one of the most instrumental forces in the United States in terms of thought leadership on the Korean Peninsula. We think this book, The Japan-South Korea Identity Clash, is something that will have very wide appeal, certainly given the media cycle and concerns about that relationship in the last few years. It is available for purchase out front after the event, and the authors have very kindly agreed to sign copies for you. It is interesting that it's here with us tonight because it's the first time that it has seen light in the idea that it's released next Wednesday. So for those of you who are Kindle users, you'll be able to download that on your Kindle devices or on your Apple devices with the Kindle app next Wednesday, or to purchase it beginning next Wednesday on Amazon.com. So Scott, Brad, thank you very much. We look forward to a stimulating discussion with this very wonderful audience.
Well, thank you, Steve, for the opportunity to be here. I also want to thank Mark Minton and Tom Hubbard, President and Chairman of the Korea Society, for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank my co-author, Brad, for working so hard together with me on this book, The Japan-South Korea Identity Clash, East Asian Security in the United States. And really, this book has had a very long gestation period. We actually began work on this when Shinzo Abe was first prime minister back in 2007. But we think that the topic is timely and important. And maybe most importantly, from my perspective, as someone who has done a lot of work on North Korea, one attraction of this work on Japan-South Korea is that I think it's easier. And in fact, I think that there is a possible way forward. And in fact, one of the things that we tried to do in the book was to present recommendations on a way forward for Japan-South Korea relations, which you all know have been troubled. We've seen this cycle of rapprochement and rupture, and then rapprochement again over now almost 50 years since Japan-ROK normalization in 1965. So the fundamental question that we tackle in the book is the puzzle of why these two countries, Japan and South Korea, that have shared values as democracies and market economies, who are geographic neighbors, and who even have common strategic interests and challenges are having so much difficulty in their relations with each other. Foreign policy realists would say that these two countries should be natural partners and possibly even allies, but they're not getting along with each other, and this is a problem for the United States, as we explore in the book. Our book offers a new framework for thinking about the relationship, not focusing on the specific issues of contention per se, but rather looking at the relationship through the lens of identity. In other words, how both countries view self and other. And we think that if approached in terms of identity, there is a way forward for both countries, but only if they're able to achieve a shared identity that enables greater cooperation with each other. And so the way we did this was that we examined South Korean and Japanese public opinion polls on how the countries view themselves and each other over the course of about a decade. And we also looked at the polling specifically on issues that divide the two countries. We looked at the nature of the divisions, the intensity of the feeling around issues in the relationship, and we examined the political context in which both sides have had politicians who have been accused of inflaming particular issues or inciting nationalism for domestic political purposes. And in addition to looking at the polling, we interviewed Japanese and South Korean thought leaders on their perceptions of the relationship with the other country. And perhaps more importantly, we've sat through over 2 decades of conferences with Japanese and South Korean colleagues and have listened and have heard what they've had to say about each other, both in the conference room and in the bar. So I think that we've got a pretty good basis upon which to try to examine some of these issues. And it shouldn't be surprising that because of their shared history, there's an intensity of feeling on both sides about each other. Maybe the clearest evidence that I can give of this in South Korea is the fact that if we look at the calendar, national holidays, there are 2 annual occasions in March and August when South Koreans take national holidays that involve reflection on struggle with and liberation from Japanese colonial rule. On the Japanese side, we think it's more subtle, but the relationship with South Korea does evoke some complex emotions. And I think the best example of that currently is the phrase that I even heard several times today from Japanese colleagues who were participating in a meeting I was at earlier, referring to Korea fatigue. So Brad's going to talk more about the main findings, especially focusing on Japan-ROK relations and especially our recommendations. But before I turn it over to him, I just wanted to say a few things about the way we see the role of the United States in the context of the Japan-South Korea relationship. I think the first point is that Japan and South Korea have been interlinked with each other from a security perspective really since the Korean War. And thinking about the security of the two countries has always been interlinked since that time. And then I think a second phase of this that shows it even more clearly is in the 1990s when we saw the emergence of the North Korean nuclear crisis, and we saw the beginnings of security cooperation between Japan and South Korea in the mid-1990s. And the U.S. took the lead in both facilitating some of those conversations and also in facilitating what was known at that time as the Trilateral Coordination and Oversight Group in the late 1990s, which was basically a Japan, South Korea, U.S. trilateral series of consultations about how to deal with North Korea. But finally, I think most importantly at this stage, the U.S. rebalance really anticipates that the spokes, if you will, in the U.S. alliance network will work together, including Japan and South Korea. And so actually the United States has an interest, a stronger interest than before, I think, and a role in bringing Japan and South Korea together. And I think one area where we can see this clearly is related to the fact that if Japan and South Korea, if the Japan-South Korea relationship is not stable, then it imposes some limits on what the United States can expect and do in terms of security cooperation in the region. So I think that basically if U.S. policymakers adopt the traditional realist framework that simply assumes that Japan and South Korea are going to get along with each other and cooperate with each other because they have shared interests and values, then actually they're going to run into trouble because they haven't taken into account the identity factor. And essentially what we suggest is that the identity factor can really help us to understand some of the deeper issues related to the history and territory and other issues that stand in the way of better cooperation between Japan and South Korea. And we try to suggest that using this identity framework can both help the United States to promote better Japan-South Korea relations and also can, in the context of hopefully the creation of a shared identity, eventually actually lay a stable foundation for Japan and South Korea to work together with each other. And so I want to turn it over to Brad to talk a little bit more about some of the issues in the Japan-South Korea relationship that we cover through the lens of public opinion polling in the book, and also our recommendations for how Japan and South Korea might be able to move forward using this identity framework as a possible way of, as a roadmap for improving their relationship. Thanks.
Thanks so much, for everyone, for coming out. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ambassador Hubbard. Steve, thanks as well for making this possible. It's a delight to be here in New York, the Korea Society, have a chance to share our thoughts with you. Thanks too to Scott. We both have this. We have to be thanking each other sufficiently. We're both keeping count. You know, collaboration is a great deal of fun, and it's especially rewarding when you have a partner and a collaborator who is deeply steeped and is enriched in the topics that you're taking up as Scott. He and I have been friends before this project began, and I think our friendship has survived this project. And I've learned a lot, and it's been really rewarding. And I would urge any of you that are doing research and embarking on any of these projects, find a good person to work with. It keeps you honest. It makes you smarter. I think it creates a better product. So thanks, Scott. And now, on to my little piece of this program. Actually, I'm not going to talk so much about the chapters of Japan and Korea. The book actually has individual ones that explain the conceptions of national identity that we happen to tease out. I think they're fascinating. I think they're wonderful snapshots. I would urge you, as you finish reading the next issue of Comparative Connections, which Steve, by the way, writes the chapter on U.S.-Korea relations, and we're very much indebted to his contributions. I would suggest that you pick up the chapters or in our book on Japan and Korea, and everything will be complete, and that's everything you pretty much need to know about Northeast Asia, I'm sure. But what I want to focus on here, at least, is the Japan-ROK relationship. And two, I think, really important pieces of information. The first is the fact that 71% of South Koreans think the Japan-Korea relationship is in bad shape, or I'm sorry, have an unfavorable view of Japan. Among Japanese, it's 54% who have an unfavorable view of South Koreans. And that's a sad situation for a relationship that, as Scott, I think, mentioned, clearly should be much stronger and much firmer. At the same time, however, about anywhere from 54 to 70% or 60 to 70% of Japanese and South Koreans also believe that this is a bad state of affairs and have concern and would like to see it fixed. So we see that this offers, if you will, a fertile soil for sort of radical or at least adventurous programs like we recommend in our book. We look at the possibilities as inherent from the President Kim Dae-jung, Prime Minister Keizo Obuchi summit, which occurred in 1998, when the two of them actually signed a very forward-looking document that gave, I think, some real body to the potential and promise of the Japan-Korea relationship, which consisted in the most part of agreeing that they would acknowledge each other's past and at the same time look ahead and try to build a forward-looking relationship. That understanding, to us, is where this relationship has to go and is the essential precondition for serious progress and for a resolution and the realization, I think, of the national interest, not only of Japan and South Korea, but of the United States as well. So now, and I want to be really brief because I think the most interesting part of this discussion will, in fact, be the discussion. talk really about our recommendations and the suggestions that we provide. I would note these are fairly radical. We have been beaten up for them already for the last 48 hours when we've discussed this with other in Washington and in Washington in various forums. And I would respond with the idea that if this was easy, this wouldn't be a problem. So the fact that there are going to be people, I think, that will instinctively recoil against some of the ideas that we present is a very natural reaction. But nevertheless, I think it's absolutely essential that we, or at least our ideas or ideas like them, or folks that are concerned, put these ideas on the table so that we start thinking about the problems and we start thinking about the potential and we start pushing people that have the potential to change this dynamic. And so in that spirit, we offer two suggestions in the book. The first is what I would call sort of the lowest common denominator approach, which sadly in today's state of politics is still fairly ambitious. And that really consists sort of two levels. The first would be the upper level, top level political leadership in each country. So the presidents and the prime ministers each get together and make an announcement about their commitment to a trilateral framework for operation. It outlines their shared values, their shared interests, the reason why the three countries need to be working together. And in addition to this one particular statement, they make it a point now and for the foreseeable future to meet every possible chance they get. The UN General Assembly, ARF meetings, APEC meetings, G20 meetings. Every time that those presidents are in the same postal code, they get together and have a trilateral sit-down to demonstrate both to the public and to the world and to their respective bureaucracies, which is a very important signal, the significance that they attach to these relationships and their need to move forward to fix them and to make them better and to realize their potential. The second piece of this lowest common denominator approach, or the sort of the small big step, would be genuine and persistent engagement among the three bureaucracies trilaterally across a whole of government set of issues. So in other words, everything from State Department policy planning to overseas development aid to military activities in every possible venue across the widest range of issues and interests. We get the three countries working together to coordinate, to familiarize, to advance, again, to themselves and to the world, the notion that these three countries can and should be working together. We would see these as an interactive process which would hopefully actually spread beyond just the government, infiltrate public thinking as well, and hopefully create, if you will, raise the level of acceptance and lower the potential for mischief for people that would choose to make history issues and identity concerns an obstacle rather than an opportunity for larger cooperation among the three. The second proposal that we have is really ambitious. We call it the Grand Bargain, and sometimes the Great Reset. And what this consists of is a very ambitious and frankly almost far-fetched proposal that consists of the three leaders getting together and suggesting and each making affirmative and very powerful statements about the nature of their relationship beyond the dry formalism, if you will, of the trilateral statements identified in step one. So for example, in the Grand Bargain, the United States acknowledges its historical responsibility for so much of what's happened in the 20th century in Asia. This is a fairly contentious position in and of itself, but the fact of the matter is, since 1900, the United States' fingerprints are on every important outcome and every important decision in the Asia-Pacific region. And the idea that the United States has not had that role, or for somehow to divorce itself from the consequences of the decisions today, we think is a little disingenuous and, quite frankly, doesn't work for the United States or U.S. national interests or those of its allies and partners. Second, we call upon Japan to make a similar acknowledgement of its past wrongdoings. In particular, we call upon Japan to give up its claim to Takeshima and Dokdo and to provide government compensation, money from the Japanese government to the comfort women. These would be, I think, bold, significant steps that would indicate a genuine desire to overcome the past and to acknowledge quite in a straightforward manner what it has done and what needs to be at least recognized for the future, for the relationship to shift its focus from the past to the future. And South Korea needs to acknowledge those steps, to acknowledge that it is prepared to put the past behind it and again to focus on the future and to build a forward-looking relationship. In a separate gesture, we call upon Japan and South Korea to sign a new treaty of friendship and cooperation and amity, or whatever flowery terms the diplomats would choose to attach to it. This would consist of 5 particular pieces. The first would be a declaration by both governments that no resolution between, no problem between them, no dispute would ever be resolved by use of force. It would essentially be a no war clause. We think that that would be an important statement, an important demonstration, I think, to the region and to the world about the way that they see their relationship working. And frankly, in these days, with the disputes and the tensions that are rising, it would be a powerful example about ways countries can work out their problems. Second, we would have a Japanese endorsement of Seoul's role in a future Korean-led or unified Korean peninsula, unified under Seoul. Third, we would have Japan and South Korea announce the shared values and interests that they have. Again, sort of a recapitulation of the framework idea that we identified in the first step. Fourth, an explicit South Korean recognition of Japan's regional security role, one that acknowledges what Japan has done in the past and what it is capable of doing in the future. And finally, we would call on the 2 countries to create a shared day of commemoration, some different holiday, a shared national holiday that does not only or moves beyond the end of the war and instead celebrates the decades of peace that have followed and the decades of peace that we anticipate will come in the future. 2 final points that I think are really important about the way that we look at this particular problem. The first, somewhat controversially, at least in Washington these days, is the idea that the Americans have a very, very important role to play. This goes against the grain for so many American bureaucrats, and quite frankly, I expect it to be a fairly contentious proposition. But I think we can make the case as Scott did. And I think, again, if you look historically, the idea that somehow the United States can wash its hands or distance itself from the consequences of decisions that our government has made over the past 115 years, 115 years, is, I think, disingenuous and false and doesn't serve us well. Secondly, significantly, this is ultimately a moral question. And I think that if we fail to acknowledge the moral component of this particular discussion, we're probably never going to get this right. And morality is an integral component of identity. So there is a great deal of reluctance and pushback from a lot of people to take on, I think, some of these recommendations. And all too often, the response is that these are politically impossible. And it may be, as long as we acknowledge, or at least we accept, politics as usual is the usual. But if I think we transcend that, if we move beyond these normal, the legalisms and acknowledge the moral dimension of the problems that we're trying to address and the larger senses of the potentials that lie ahead if we make those fateful steps, I think we'll all find that these are fairly reasonable and ultimately doable. And I know Scott and I both look forward to our Nobel Prize nominations sometime in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Glosserman and Scott Snyder. Another round of applause, please. Both authors have agreed to sign the book out front. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here at the Korea Society. Again, for programs and please, for membership, we'd love to have you on board. Go to koreasociety.org. You will also find there audio downloads and YouTube video links for programs like this, and we strongly recommend those to you. Also, please do enjoy our exhibition, which is open out front. It's a stunning array of visual arts. But again, to Brad and to Scott, thank you both for coming, and to all of you, enjoy the book, which is available next week on Amazon and Kindle as well.
Thank you, Steve.